Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey everybody, this is the Digital Asset Investor, and today I'm going to start this video by talking about this Bitcoin halving for a second and tell you what I think is going to happen here. And then I'm going to go into this wild and crazy idea that I have that the XRP escrow is what we've called pre-allocated, but I'm going to go into that a little bit more and tell you what I really think, a couple of different scenarios. And I know that's a wild and crazy idea to some of you out there, but I'm going to go over some things that are wild and crazy that have happened and are happening right now, and then we'll talk about what's crazy and what's not. But first, let's go through this Bitcoin halving thing. You got 4 more days left until the Bitcoin halving. Now, there's no way to know for sure what exactly is going to happen when this halving occurs, but you can look at history, and that's all that I try to look at history and just use a little common sense guided by what's happened already and that type of thing. That's usually how I think about things like this. So if we go down and we look at history, and I may have shown you this before, the first halving and the second halving. Now, if you just look at these, the real stuff happens after the halving, but not necessarily immediately after. And I'll use the second halving, which I believe was in maybe May of 2016. I'll zoom in on this one. This is the second halving. And if you go down, I think it was around here, right here in May, and you'll notice that right after the halving, there was a spike up in negative stuff. So people were selling, and you'll see that it actually went down. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happens after this, because you've had so much build up to the fact that the halving's coming. It would be, to me, a natural thing that, oh, nothing's going to happen, and then there's a sell-off. So this won't surprise me at all if this happens. What is pretty clear from looking at just these two is that over the course of the next, year, 2 years, you have a rise in prices, and everything has followed Bitcoin. So that's kind of how I see this thing playing out. That's just what I think. I could be wrong. Many people could be wrong. Now, let's go and let's talk to reiterate. I've talked in my video before this we've been talking about the XRP supply and which parts of the supply are what and all that. And we've talked about how you've got all this, you got 49.5 billion in XRP in escrow for Ripple. Well, not only do I believe that is, when I say it's pre-allocated, there's really one of two ways that could be done. Either, and I believe we've been told which way it's going to be done, and I'll show you in a second. But either you've got a pre-allocation where all of that in the escrow, it's in Ripple's escrow, but it's earmarked or designated to whatever, banks, central banks, countries, who knows. It could be delegated to, or it could be earmarked to certain IMF member countries. So I'll go down that road. But the second way is the way that pre-allocation could also be done, is that an organization or an international organization is created and it's rolled. So you have Ripple, the company, and then you have another company and or organization that's created. And then you have members of that company or organization, and those are allocated by percentage of the XRP. That's the way I really think it's going down, but I'll go into that. But first I'm going to show you, let's talk about Bretton Woods first. Bretton Woods is back in business. This is from XRP Yo-Yo. Listen to this video.
Monetary system. For more insight, now let's cross live to Professor Dimitris Tomakis in Oxford. He's from University of Oxford, and he's an expert in financial economics. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor. So talking about challenges to the current international monetary system, we have to talk about the role of cryptocurrencies, or some may call it digital currency. Many people think it's the same thing. So let's take Facebook's just announced Libra as an example. Now, many countries is sees this as a major threat to their financial systems, even to their sovereignty. But interestingly, it's reported that the chief of Bank of England, Mark Carney, shows some cautious support to Libra. Why is that?
Thank you very much for inviting me. In fact, in order to be able to address the issue of cryptocurrencies and Bretton Woods too, so to speak, we have to understand the deeper definition of fiat money as we know it nowadays. Money is an institutionalized symbol of trust, and as such, the US dollar has a preeminent role in international monetary arrangements that emanated from the Bretton Woods after the Second World War in 1944. Thereby, as such, whenever there is a financial crisis, we have the so-called flight to quality, and flight to quality of capital usually takes the form of getting out of distressed countries and saving in dollars. Thereby, the cryptocurrency as such, it is very, very difficult to replace mainstream fiat money and US dollar in particular as a standardized, institutionalized symbol of trust. Consequently, there are associated regulatory issues with cryptocurrency. For example, what is the purpose, what is the origin and the genesis of the funds that flow the cryptocurrency, and whether the speculative.
Okay, so this video was made, I believe, a while back, and of course, those are the kind of conversations you're going to have. I remember the first time I ever heard the talk about the IMF having to do with Ripple or any of this. I thought that was the craziest thing. I thought we just had this new asset class, but the more that I hung around, the more that I saw, the more I didn't think it was so crazy. So let's look here. There's a small clip about what the IMF and the World Bank are.
IMF. The IMF was created alongside the World Bank in 1945 as overlapping finance arms of the United Nations. The World Bank focuses on financing and investing in developing countries, as well as eliminating poverty. The IMF primarily monitors exchange rates, stabilizes international monetary systems, and fosters global financial cooperation. Since World War II, the world's economies have become interdependent on each other through trade and investment. While this helps strengthen the global financial system, it also creates weaknesses in the economic chain. When an unforeseeable crisis like a recession or natural disaster destabilizes one nation's economy, that can severely affect dependent countries. The balancing force of the IMF prevents any potential domino effect in collapsing economies. The IMF is one of several global banks that provides loans to troubled economies to promote a stable world economy. The IMF and its sister organization, the World Bank, tend to serve more Western interests, like the US and the EU, while other global banks, like the New Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, serve Chinese and Russian interests more. In total, the IMF has 188 member states. After the global
Okay, I was going to stop it there, but I just wanted to make the point that these investment banks, these development banks, that's kind of where I think all of this is going, and you can have all sorts of member countries in some kind of a development bank. Now, don't just take my word for it. Let's look at this, because this is where this conversation is. Total XRP placed in escrow, 49.5 billion. I don't believe for a second, and it may sound crazy, but I don't believe for a second that Ripple is going to hold on to that. Here's what I think happens. I think Ripple heads toward IPO, and I think at some point this is separated off from Ripple the company. And I believe that what Miguel, first let's make sure we understand. Whatever organization or entity does end up holding this XRP, or the majority of this XRP, I believe we already know who will do the custody, and that would be Okay, now I think Miguel Valles gave us the answer to how this goes down right here.
And I've had conversations with Chris Larson and Arthur and David around the fact that it is, I think, transformational software that we kind of owe it our best effort to get it to where it belongs and where it deserves to be. So, being part of a team that's focused on doing that and, literally doing something that's never been done before, it's pretty cool. My wife thinks I'm nuts because every other word out of my mouth these days is XRP, and I seem to be working, 27 hours a day, and I'm having dreams about payment rails. But I firmly believe that's how you get to do something really special. And the company is, it's amazing what it's been able to achieve. Incredibly solid. Our leadership is amazing.
Here it comes.
I think we're on a path that hopefully we'll all look back someday and be like, wow, I can't believe I was a part of that. So yeah, I'm obviously pretty stoked.
Like, how do you intend to distribute the rest of the XRP then?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Mahir. And I don't necessarily know that we'll ever distribute all of it. In my mind's eye, there's a possibility where, we end up more of a lending kind of, more of a lender of last resort capacity, maybe. I think that would be a little strange for a software company, and maybe some things would have to change structurally. Maybe we have to have a different organization or something. Who knows, right? But as these capital markets develop, as liquidity develops, there are going to be folks who, if they want to provide liquidity in the asset, don't want to necessarily own the asset because that puts them in harm's way.
All right. I think the answer was given there, but he called himself a lender. He said that Ripple was going to be a lender of last resort. And I've done a video on this lender of last resort before, but words mean things. And so I wanted to show you the definition. This is on dictionary. This is Cambridge Dictionary. Lender of last resort, a central bank or international organization that lends money to banks or countries in difficult financial periods when they cannot borrow from anywhere else. The IMF is known as the lender of last resort to countries in financial trouble. So all of a sudden, a guy who's an Ivy Leaguer is referring to this private company so that they could be some sort of a lender of last resort. Well, not according to the definition. A central bank or an international organization could. And so he said in that clip, he said that it would probably be some other kind of an entity. I believe that's where this goes. Rachel Lee picked up on it too. I keep telling you, Rachel Lee, the same one that disappeared off of Twitter that I think knew things. Rachel Lee, listen to Miguel Valles slip up and give it all away. Read between the lines. Ripple cannot become a lender of last resort. That's the IMF's job. Okay, and then let's go to, this is the Bretton Woods system, folks. And remember, when the Bretton Woods system was created, so was the IMF and the World Bank, preparing to rebuild the international economic system while World War II was still raging. 730 delegates from 44 allied nations gathered at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, United States, for the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference, also known as the Bretton Woods Conference. The delegates deliberated during 1 to 22 July 1944 and signed the Bretton Woods Agreement on its final day, setting up a system of rules, institutions, and procedures to regulate the international monetary system. These accords established the International Monetary Fund and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which today is part of the World Bank. So, folks, I tell you all this to tell you, don't think for a minute that the world can't get together and create some kind of an organization for all this, because look, the feds are not going to allow Ripple to own all of this and become some quadrillion trillion dollar company that rivals a country. It's not going to happen. Never was going to happen. That's why I've always thought that this was that the government was working with them from the beginning. Now, I'm about to do something for those of you that say, oh, well, that's just crazy talk. Yeah, that's just crazy talk. Well, let's talk about what's crazy. And I'll start right here. I'm just going to ask you a few questions about what's crazy. Is the U.S. being $25 trillion in debt crazy? Ask yourself these questions I'm about to ask you. Was the formation of the Federal Reserve in secret on Jekyll Island by representatives of J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Rothschilds, and Warburgs to create a monopoly on money crazy? Was that crazy? Is Bitcoin being created out of thin air, out of the financial crisis, and going from $0 to $20,000 crazy? You think that's crazy? I do. Was it crazy when the United States bailed out the banks in 2008 with TARP? I thought that was ludicrous and crazy back then. I did. Was QE1, QE2, and Operation Twist crazy, and all the other government programs that the Fed came up with, which were nothing but just code for printing money out the wazoo? Was that crazy? Is what has gone on in the repo market since last year crazy? I think it's totally crazy and makes no sense. Are negative interest rates crazy because the world's living under negative interest rates? Here's another one. Is oil being worth below zero, crossing $0 and going into the negative? Is that crazy? Any of these things I'm talking about, did you ever think you would see any of them in your life? Are they crazy? I think they're insane crazy, all of them. Is shutting down the entire world's economy crazy, like they did in the current events, which is still shut down, by the way? Is that crazy? I think it is insane. Is every citizen being bailed out with stimulus because they are not allowed to work crazy? I think it is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, folks. Is everyone wearing a mask to the grocery store crazy? Is my children being stuck inside their home and not being able to go out and play with their friends crazy? I think it's crazy. I think it's ludicrous. Is unemployment being worse than the Great Depression crazy? I think it's crazy. These are all things I never thought I'd see in my life. Is a startup company called Ripple that in 7 years attracts Ivy League talent from all over the world and has connections to almost every important branch of government in the United States and worldwide, and is in the room with central banks left and right and mega banks left and right, and does all this while selling XRP, a digital asset that, according to the media, could be called a security at any day? Is that crazy? Because to me, that's crazy. But you know what? I think I'm crazy like a fox because I hold XRP. Because if all of this is crazy and you think that it's crazy, the idea that maybe Ripple never was intended to own all this XRP that's in escrow, I don't think that's crazy at all. I think that makes sense in a crazy, crazy world that we live in. I'm the digital asset investor. I'm not an investment advisor. This is for entertainment purposes only. Please subscribe and hit the like button and tell your friends and family that we're not crazy. The world's crazy, but what we're thinking makes complete sense in this world of crazy. Thank you for listening.